It was about 11:30 on December 25, 2009, a quiet Christmas morning. The administration of President Barack Obama, the constitutional lawyer who had risen to power on a message of change from the tumultuous era of President George W. Bush's global war on terror, was not yet a year old. The new president was vacationing in his native Hawaii, and his national security legal policy team were scattered to their own homes as an event that would reshape their story began to unfold. Around 9,200 feet above the surface of the Earth, Northwest Airlines Flight 253, an Airbus A330 bound from Amsterdam to Detroit, approached the border between Canadian and American airspace. Inside, one of the 290 people aboard, a Nigerian passenger named Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib, stood up from seat 19A, next to the window looking out onto the aircraft's right wing. 3 days earlier, the young man, a banker's son who had studied in Britain and was fluent in English, had marked his 23rd birthday. Now, he was preparing to die. Abdul Muttalib rummaged through the carry-on bag stashed in the overhead bin in a row behind his seat, found a Ziploc of toiletries, and carried it down the aisle to the bathrooms at the rear of the plane. Inside one of the cramped compartments, he methodically washed his face, brushed his teeth, and dabbed on cologne. Then, considering himself purified, he walked back to his seat, past dozens of the strangers whom he intended to kill. Abdul Muttalib believed he was about to commit an act of jihad and martyrdom. This would be retaliation, in his word, for the United States' support of Israel in its killing of innocent and civilian Muslim populations in Palestine, as well as for America's killing of innocent and civilian Muslim populations in Yemen, Iraq, Somalia, Afghanistan, and beyond, most of them women, children, and non-combatants. The innocent passengers on the plane who would die if his suicide bombing was successful were nearly all non-combatants too, and they included many women and children. But Abdul Muttalib dismissed them all as collateral damage in a war between the United States and Islam. It was a misuse of the term, since he was deliberately targeting them and a civilian aircraft. But the term was also heavily loaded from its frequent invocation by the American government in its excuses for the civilian casualties that resulted incidentally from its missile strikes targeted at Islamist militants, when the United States acknowledged those strikes and bystander deaths at all. At 11:38 a.m., Flight 253 was passing over Lake St. Clair, which lies along the international border northeast of Detroit and was about 9,000 feet above the ground. Muttering to a nearby passenger that he did not feel well and wanted to sleep a bit before they landed, Abdul Muttalib slumped back in his seat and draped a thin airline blanket over his head and body. Concealed beneath it, he said his final prayers to himself and then pulled down his cargo-style pants. His underwear, which he had been wearing for days, was curiously bulky, like a toddler's pull-up Pampers. But the extra padding was not intended to absorb. Sewn into pouches were packages of chemicals known by the abbreviations TATP and PETN, the latter a prime ingredient in plastic explosives. The idea, conceived by a bomb maker in Yemen, was to ignite a chemical fire that would detonate the TATP, which would in turn trigger a far more powerful PETN blast, a compound bomb that used no metal parts and so was undetectable at a routine airport security checkpoint. The plane would be blown open in midair. Abdul Muttalib unwrapped the tape from a plastic syringe, inserted its tip into the seam around the TATP pouch, and pushed the plunger.